Human beings are social creatures at the most fundamental level. From the dawn of civilization, we have survived, thrived, and evolved within groups. We are not designed to exist in prolonged isolation. The structures of our brains, the rhythms of our emotions, and the very fabric of our psychology are all wired for connection. To think of friendship as some optional accessory to life, something nice but not necessary, is a profound misunderstanding of human nature. Friendship is not a luxury, it is a survival necessity. And when a person, particularly a woman, finds herself without friends, the consequences can be far more severe than she might initially realize. Without friendships, a woman is left without the essential network of emotional support that buffers her against the hardships of life. No one is immune to suffering. Pain, disappointment, illness, loss, and failure are inevitable realities of the human experience. Friendship provides the crucial reinforcement that allows us to endure these trials with resilience. A woman without friends faces her struggles alone, with no external perspective to help her process grief, no voice of reason to counter her own self-doubt, and no comforting presence to reassure her that she is not alone. Even the strongest individuals, when deprived of social connection, begin to falter. Isolation magnifies pain, makes burdens feel heavier, and strips away the emotional strength that relationships naturally replenish. There is an evolutionary basis for this. In ancient times, isolation was a death sentence. To be cast out from the tribe meant vulnerability to predators, starvation, and a lack of resources that no one person could secure alone. Even though modern society no longer operates under such immediate physical threats, our biological and psychological systems have not caught up. The body reacts to loneliness in much the same way it does to danger. Studies show that chronic loneliness leads to increased levels of cortisol, the stress hormone, which in turn weakens the immune system, raises blood pressure, and increases the risk of heart disease and depression. This is not just about emotions, this is about survival. A woman without friends may not be facing literal wolves at the edge of the firelight, but she is still under threat, this time from the slow erosion of her mental and physical well-being. But the necessity of friendship goes beyond just the avoidance of suffering. It is also a critical factor in personal growth. The mind is not designed to exist in a vacuum. We define ourselves, refine our beliefs, and sharpen our understanding of the world through our relationships with others. Friends challenge us. They force us to confront our blind spots, to rethink flawed assumptions, and to become better versions of ourselves. A woman who lacks these influences may become trapped in an echo chamber of her own thoughts, with no external forces to challenge her perspectives or encourage her to improve. She risks becoming stagnant, reinforcing the same habits, thought patterns, and emotional responses that may not serve her well. There is also the matter of identity. Who we are is, in part, reflected back at us through the eyes of those around us. Friends act as mirrors that help shape our self-perception. They remind us of our worth when we forget it, call out our faults when we refuse to see them, and celebrate our strengths when we underestimate ourselves. A woman with no friends lacks this critical feedback loop. Over time, she may begin to lose sight of her own identity. If no one is there to affirm her existence, does she still matter? If no one shares in her joys, do her victories even feel real? These are questions that begin to creep into the mind of the isolated person, and they are questions that erode confidence, purpose, and the ability to engage with the world meaningfully. The consequences of lacking friendships extend into every area of life. Career success, personal development, mental health, and even longevity are all significantly impacted by the presence or absence of meaningful relationships. Studies have consistently shown that people with strong social connections live longer, report higher levels of happiness, and are better able to cope with stress and adversity. There is no substitute for this. Money, achievements, or even familial relationships, while important, cannot replace the unique role that friendship plays in human flourishing. What then is to be done? The answer is not as simple as just making friends. True friendship requires effort, vulnerability, and most importantly, reciprocity. One of the harsh truths of life is that no one is owed friendship. It must be earned, not through manipulation or desperate attempts to fit in, but through genuine engagement with others. It requires that a person offers value, not in a transactional sense, but in the form of presence, kindness, and a willingness to be part of someone else's life. For a woman who finds herself without friends, the path forward is difficult but not impossible. It demands stepping outside of one's comfort zone, embracing the possibility of rejection, and actively seeking out relationships that are meaningful rather than convenient. It requires a shift in mindset from seeing friendship as an optional part of life to recognizing it as a fundamental pillar of existence. Without it, she is not merely alone, she is at risk in ways both seen and unseen. Because friendship is not just about company, it is about survival. Loneliness is not just an emotional state, it is a biological condition that affects the brain in profound and dangerous ways. When a person experiences prolonged isolation, the effects go far beyond a temporary feeling of sadness or longing for company. The brain is designed for connection, and when that connection is absent, the entire neurological system begins to shift, often in ways that make it even harder to break free from loneliness. This creates a vicious cycle, one in which loneliness not only feels bad, but also alters the way a person thinks, perceives the world, and interacts with others. One of the most concerning effects of loneliness is the way it heightens the brain's threat response. The human brain is wired for survival, and social connections have always played a critical role in that. For most of human history, being alone meant being vulnerable. A person without a tribe was at risk of attack, starvation, or injury without aid. As a result, the brain evolved to see social isolation as a danger signal, activating the same stress response that would occur in life-threatening situations. When loneliness becomes chronic, the brain shifts into a state of hypervigilance. It starts scanning the environment for threats, interpreting neutral or even positive social interactions as negative. A simple conversation may feel like an attack, a casual remark may seem like a judgment, and the absence of a response may be perceived as rejection. Over time, this rewiring makes it incredibly difficult for a lonely person to reconnect with others because their brain has been conditioned to expect hostility or indifference. Another major consequence of loneliness is the way it impairs cognitive function and decision-making. Studies have shown that chronic loneliness is linked to reduced memory, slower cognitive processing, and even a higher risk of developing dementia. The reason for this lies in the way loneliness increases stress hormones, particularly cortisol. Elevated cortisol levels interfere with the brain's ability to process and retain information, making it harder to concentrate, learn new things, or make rational decisions. This can create a dangerous spiral where loneliness leads to poor choices, whether in relationships, work, or self-care, which in turn reinforces the isolation. A person struggling with loneliness may withdraw even further, not out of choice, but because their brain is quite literally struggling to function at its optimal level. Loneliness also has a profound impact on emotional regulation. When people are socially connected, they have external sources of validation, support, and feedback. Friends and loved ones help regulate emotions by offering perspective, comfort, and reassurance. But when a person is alone for extended periods, they lose that external regulation and must rely solely on their own perceptions. Unfortunately, the lonely brain is not a neutral observer. It is biased toward negativity. Without outside input to balance emotions, loneliness often leads to increased anxiety, irritability, and depressive thinking. Small setbacks feel like overwhelming failures, and minor rejections feel catastrophic. The brain begins to interpret loneliness itself as a personal failing rather than a circumstance that can be changed, leading to a deeper sense of shame and self-blame. Perhaps one of the most insidious effects of loneliness is the way it reduces motivation for social interaction. In a healthy, connected brain, social interaction triggers the release of dopamine, a neurotransmitter associated with pleasure and reward. This reinforces positive social behaviors and encourages people to seek out connection. However, when loneliness becomes chronic, the brain adapts by reducing dopamine production in response to social stimuli. Instead of feeling good after an interaction, a lonely person may feel exhausted, overwhelmed, or even more isolated. Over time, this leads to social withdrawal, as the brain no longer associates connection with reward. The person may begin to avoid social situations altogether, not necessarily because they don't want companionship, but because their brain has stopped recognizing social engagement as something beneficial. Loneliness also affects self-perception, distorting the way a person views themselves in relation to the world. Studies have shown that lonely individuals often develop negative self-narratives, believing they are unworthy of friendship, fundamentally different from others, or destined to remain alone. These thoughts are not necessarily reflective of reality, but they become deeply ingrained because loneliness deprives the brain of positive social reinforcement. When people lack friendships, they also lack external reminders of their value, humor, kindness, and uniqueness. This creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. People who believe they are unworthy of connection may unintentionally push others away, further reinforcing their isolation. The physiological impact of loneliness cannot be ignored either. Beyond its effects on the brain, chronic loneliness increases inflammation in the body, weakens the immune system, and is linked to a higher risk of heart disease, stroke, and premature death. The reason for this is that prolonged social isolation keeps the body in a state of low-level stress. The brain, believing it is in danger, keeps the body on high alert, suppressing functions that are not immediately necessary for survival, such as immune response and cellular repair. Over time, this takes a toll on overall health, making lonely individuals more susceptible to illness and chronic conditions. Breaking out of loneliness is not as simple as just deciding to be social again. Because loneliness rewires the brain, reconnecting with others requires deliberate effort and patience. It may feel unnatural, even painful at first, because the brain has adapted to isolation. The key is to start small, simple interactions, brief conversations. Even just being around people in a shared space can begin to reverse the neurological effects of loneliness. Over time, as social experiences become more frequent, the brain will start to rewire itself back toward connection. Dopamine will return in response to social engagement, the threat response will diminish, and self-perception will improve. The most important thing to understand about loneliness is that it is not just a passing feeling. It is a condition that fundamentally changes how the brain functions. It distorts perceptions, weakens cognitive abilities, increases stress, and reduces the ability to experience joy in connection. It is not something to be ignored or accepted as a normal part of life. It is a signal, one that demands attention and action. Because left unaddressed, loneliness does not simply remain a feeling. It becomes a prison, one built not by walls, but by the mind itself. Friends play an essential role in shaping who we are. They act as mirrors, reflecting our thoughts, behaviors, and emotions back to us in ways we cannot always see on our own. Without friends, we lack the external perspectives that help us understand ourselves more clearly. Friendship is not just about companionship or shared experiences. It is a critical mechanism through which we refine our personalities, correct our flaws, and develop a more grounded sense of identity. When we are surrounded by people who genuinely care for us, we are constantly exposed to reflections of ourselves, both in our strengths and in our weaknesses. One of the most significant ways friends serve as mirrors is by offering honest feedback. People often have blind spots when it comes to their own behaviors and attitudes. It is difficult to see ourselves objectively because we experience life from within, shaped by our own thoughts, emotions, and biases. A true friend, however, can provide an outside perspective. They can point out inconsistencies in our thinking, challenge our assumptions, and even call us out when we act against our own values. Without this kind of feedback, we risk becoming stuck in patterns of behavior that may not serve us well. Friendship also refines us by reinforcing our best qualities. When a person is kind, supportive, or courageous, good friends recognize and affirm those traits. This encouragement reinforces positive behavior, helping individuals build confidence and self-assurance. People tend to rise to the expectations set by those around them, and when friends see the best in someone, it becomes easier for that person to live up to those expectations. Over time, this positive reinforcement helps solidify a person's sense of identity. They begin to see themselves not only as they perceive themselves, but also as their friends see them, capable, valuable, and worthy of respect. At the same time, friends also highlight the areas where we need to grow. No one is perfect, and everyone has flaws that they may not recognize in themselves. Some people struggle with arrogance, others with insecurity, and some with impatience or a tendency to push people away. These traits can go unchecked when a person lacks meaningful friendships. However, good friends do not just overlook these flaws, they help address them. A true friend will point out when someone is being selfish, dishonest, or unfair. This kind of confrontation is not always comfortable, but it is essential for growth. Without friends to hold a mirror up to our weaknesses, we are far more likely to remain trapped in self-destructive habits. Beyond direct feedback, friendships also shape people through imitation and influence. Human beings are naturally social creatures, and much of who we become is shaped by the people we surround ourselves with. If someone spends time with disciplined, ambitious, and kind individuals, they are far more likely to adopt those qualities themselves. Conversely, if someone is surrounded by people who are negative, dishonest, or lacking in motivation, those traits can easily seep into their own behavior. This is why it is often said that a person becomes the average of the 5 people they spend the most time with. The company we keep not only reflects who we are, but also influences who we become. Friendships also serve as emotional mirrors, helping individuals process their feelings in ways that would be difficult to do alone. Emotions can be overwhelming and confusing, and it is often through conversations with friends that people gain clarity about what they are experiencing. A friend can validate feelings, offering reassurance that an emotion is justified, or they can challenge an emotional reaction if it is exaggerated or misplaced. In either case, this external perspective helps regulate emotions, ensuring that they are neither ignored nor allowed to spiral out of control. Without this kind of emotional mirroring, a person may struggle to fully understand their own inner world. Another important aspect of friendship as a mirror is the way it reveals how we treat others. A person may believe themselves to be kind, loyal, or generous, but it is through friendships that these qualities are truly tested. How do they respond when a friend is in need? Do they show up consistently, or do they disappear when things become inconvenient? Do they celebrate their friends' successes, or do they become envious? These moments provide powerful insights into a person's character. They show whether someone is truly the kind of person they aspire to be, or if there is still work to be done. In this way, friendships act not only as reflections of who we are, but also as challenges to become better. It is also worth considering what happens when a person lacks close friendships. Without these external reflections, self-perception can become distorted. A person may either overestimate their strengths, becoming arrogant and dismissive of others, or underestimate their value, falling into insecurity and self-doubt. They may struggle to regulate their emotions or fail to recognize their own toxic behaviors. Without the grounding presence of friends, it is easy to drift into unhealthy patterns of thinking and behavior. The presence of meaningful friendships is one of the greatest gifts a person can have. Friends provide the clarity that is difficult to achieve alone, helping individuals refine their thoughts, emotions, and actions in a way that leads to personal growth. They reflect the best in us, challenge the worst, and help us navigate the complexities of life with greater wisdom and self-awareness. More than just providing company, they help us become better, stronger, and more complete versions of ourselves. Social isolation is a complex and often misunderstood condition. While external circumstances such as relocation, loss, or life transitions can contribute to isolation, one of the most dangerous aspects of it is that it is frequently self-imposed. This is what makes it particularly insidious. Because it feels like a choice, it can go unchallenged for years. A person may slowly withdraw, convincing themselves that solitude is preferable or that connection is simply too difficult. Over time, isolation becomes a habit, then a state of being, and eventually a self-sustaining cycle that rewires the brain, making re-entry into social life seem impossible. At first, social withdrawal may seem like a temporary retreat. People often step back from social interactions when they are going through difficult times. After a failure, a breakup, the loss of a loved one, or even persistent stress. In these moments, isolation can feel like a way to regain control, to avoid judgment, or to prevent further emotional strain. The individual tells themselves they are just taking a break, that they will reconnect when they feel ready. But loneliness does not operate on a simple timeline. The longer a person remains isolated, the harder it becomes to reach out again. One of the most dangerous aspects of self-imposed isolation is how it distorts self-perception. The brain adapts to its environment, and when social interaction is absent, the mind starts to shift in ways that reinforce further withdrawal. A person who isolates themselves begins to feel invisible, forgotten, or even undeserving of connection. Their confidence in social skills diminishes, and they may start believing they are awkward, uninteresting, or incapable of meaningful relationships. These thoughts are not necessarily reflective of reality, but without external validation from friends or acquaintances, they become the dominant narrative in the person's mind. Over time, social isolation also leads to increased anxiety about social situations. The more time a person spends alone, the more unfamiliar social interaction becomes. This creates a paradox. Although they may crave connection, the idea of engaging with others starts to feel overwhelming. Small talk feels exhausting, gatherings seem intimidating, and the thought of initiating conversation becomes paralyzing. As a result, they avoid social opportunities, reinforcing the cycle of isolation. This is why self-imposed isolation is so dangerous. It feeds on itself, making escape increasingly difficult. Another troubling consequence of social isolation is that it distorts the way people interpret the world around them. Studies have shown that chronic loneliness increases negative thinking patterns. Isolated individuals are more likely to perceive neutral or even positive social cues as threats. A simple delay in response from a friend may be interpreted as rejection, and a lack of invitations may be seen as proof that they are unwanted. Because they are alone, there is no one to challenge these thoughts, no external reality check to offer a different perspective. This is how isolation breeds paranoia, resentment, and deepening mistrust of others, further discouraging social re-entry. Perhaps one of the most severe effects of prolonged social isolation is its impact on mental and physical health. Loneliness triggers the release of stress hormones like cortisol, which, over time, weakens the immune system, increases inflammation, and contributes to heart disease, anxiety, and depression. It has even been linked to an increased risk of Alzheimer's and cognitive decline. The brain perceives isolation as a state of emergency, as if the person has been abandoned by the tribe. It reacts by staying in a heightened stress response, preparing for danger that never comes. This chronic stress takes a toll on both the body and mind, making an isolated individual more prone to illness, fatigue, and emotional instability. One of the most tragic aspects of self-imposed isolation is that it often begins with small decisions that seem insignificant at the time. A person declines an invitation because they are tired. They stop reaching out to friends because life feels overwhelming. They convince themselves that people do not really care, so they stop trying. Each decision seems logical in the moment, but over time they accumulate into a lifestyle of solitude. By the time the person realizes they are lonely, the idea of rebuilding their social world feels nearly impossible. Breaking free from self-imposed isolation is challenging, but it is not impossible. It requires deliberate effort and a willingness to tolerate discomfort. The first step is recognizing that isolation is not a personality trait, it is a habit. And like any habit, it can be changed. It starts with small actions, responding to messages, saying yes to invitations, engaging in brief conversations, or even just being in social spaces like coffee shops or parks to rebuild familiarity with human interaction. The goal is to reintroduce social connection in manageable steps, allowing the brain to rewire itself for engagement rather than withdrawal. Ultimately, the most dangerous thing about self-imposed isolation is that it tricks the mind into believing it is a choice rather than a trap. People convince themselves they prefer being alone, that relationships are too much found in isolation, but in the shared social interaction that connect us to others. Human beings are wired for social creatures. Isolation is not just an inconvenience, it is a slow erosion of mental, emotional, and physical well-being. Shared. Our recognizing the dangers of self-imposed loneliness is the first step toward breaking free by those who witness our existence, give life meaning. Without shared experiences, without others to see us, hear us, and engage with us, life begins to lose its depth. It becomes a solitary echo, a fading imprint on the world that struggles to hold its significance. From the earliest moments of life, people seek connection. Infants cry, not just for nourishment, but for comfort, for the reassurance that someone is there. As children, people learn who they are through interactions, through laughter, play, and the mirrored reactions of those around them. This need for shared experiences does not diminish with age, it only deepens. It is through relationships, through the act of being seen and understood, that individuals construct their personal narratives. Without others to witness and affirm these stories, they become fragile, uncertain, and at risk of disappearing altogether. Imagine a moment of great achievement, graduating from university, landing a dream job, or completing a personal goal. If no one is there to share in that success, does it feel as meaningful? Without someone to say, I see you, I recognize your effort, and I celebrate with you, the victory can feel hollow. This is not because personal accomplishments are meaningless on their own, but because meaning itself is relational. People measure the significance of events, emotions, and even their own identity in relation to others. We need witnesses to make our lives feel real. The same principle applies to hardship. Grief, pain, and struggles become unbearable when endured alone. When someone is going through deep sorrow, one of the most powerful comforts is not a solution or advice, but simply another person's presence, someone who acknowledges the pain and says, "You are not alone." In moments of loss, it is not the mere passage of time that heals, but the shared experience of mourning, the connection to others who validate the depth of that loss. Without those witnesses, suffering can feel endless, as if it exists in a void with no recognition or resolution. Isolation erodes identity. When a person spends too much time alone, their sense of self begins to blur. Who are we without the context of others? Our humor is shaped by the laughter of friends. Our wisdom is refined through discussion and debate. Even our sense of morality and purpose is tested and strengthened in the presence of other people. Without interaction, these qualities stagnate. The mind turns inward, recycling the same thoughts, unchallenged and Over time, a person who has no one to share their experiences with may begin to feel as though they barely exist at all. This is why loneliness is often described as an invisible weight. A person may be physically present in the world, but without meaningful engagement, they feel unseen, unheard, and slowly fading. This fading is not just metaphorical, it has real consequences. Studies have shown that chronic loneliness affects brain function, cognitive decline, and even premature death. The brain, deprived of social interaction, begins to atrophy, just as an unused muscle weakens over time. Simply put, Humans are not designed to exist in isolation. Even creativity and ambition are fueled by shared experiences. Artists, writers, and thinkers throughout history have drawn inspiration from others, whether through collaboration, feedback, or simply knowing that their work will be seen and interpreted. A story that is never read, a song that is never heard, an idea that is never discussed. These things struggle to hold meaning in the absence of an audience. This is not about seeking approval, but about the fundamental nature of human expression. It is meant to be shared. Some may argue that life's meaning should come from within, that self-fulfillment should be enough. While self-reflection and independence are important, they are not substitutes for connection. A person may find peace in solitude, but even the deepest self-discovery ultimately seeks expression. We long to share our insights, to teach, to inspire, to pass on our experiences in a way that connects us to others. The desire to be witnessed is not a weakness, it is an essential part of what makes life meaningful. Without witnesses, memories fade faster. A moment shared between two people remains alive in both their minds, reinforcing its reality. But a moment experienced alone, without conversation or reflection, slips away more easily. This is why people reminisce with friends and loved ones, to keep their stories alive, to affirm that their lives have mattered, that they have been seen and heard. In the end, the measure of a life well lived is not just in what we do, but in how deeply we connect with others. The greatest joys are those that are shared, the most profound lessons those that are passed on, and the truest sense of self, the one that is reflected back through meaningful relationships. Without shared experiences, we begin to fade, not because we lack value, but because our very nature is designed for connection. To be seen, to be known, to be remembered, these are not luxuries. They are the essence of what it means to be alive. Reconnection is always possible, but it does not happen by chance. It requires courage, effort, and personal transformation. When someone has been disconnected, whether from friends, family, or society, they may feel trapped in isolation, uncertain about how to return to meaningful relationships. The longer the isolation lasts, the more intimidating the idea of reconnecting becomes. It can feel as though the world has moved on, that relationships are irreparable, or that one's social skills have eroded beyond repair. But these fears, while understandable, are not absolute truths. Rebuilding connections is possible, and though it may not be easy, the process can lead to profound personal growth. The first and most difficult step toward reconnection is having the courage to face discomfort. Isolation creates a false sense of safety. It protects against rejection, awkwardness, and vulnerability. But it also deepens loneliness and weakens social confidence. To reconnect, one must step into uncertainty, initiating conversations, rekindling old relationships, and possibly facing the fear of being ignored or unwelcomed. This requires emotional resilience, a willingness to tolerate discomfort in order to break free from isolation. Avoiding this step only reinforces the cycle of loneliness, making reconnection seem even more daunting over time. Courage is also necessary to confront the internal narratives that sustain disconnection. When someone has been alone for a long time, they may develop beliefs that reinforce their isolation. They may tell themselves, "No one wants me around. I've changed too much," or "It's too late to fix things." These thoughts, though they feel real, are often distorted by loneliness itself. To reconnect, one must challenge these narratives and take action despite them. It takes courage to believe that people might still care, that relationships can be mended, and that personal transformation is possible. Effort is the next crucial element of reconnection. Meaningful relationships do not form passively. They require active participation and persistence. It is not enough to wait for others to reach out. One must take initiative. This might mean sending a message to an old friend, joining a community group, or simply making eye contact and engaging in small talk with strangers. These may seem like minor actions, but they are the foundation of rebuilding social confidence. Each interaction, no matter how small, strengthens the ability to connect again. Effort also means consistency. Reconnection is not a one-time event, but a process. Relationships, especially those that have been neglected, need repeated investment. It is easy to give up after an initial attempt if the response is not immediate or enthusiastic. But patience is key. People have their own lives, and reconnection often happens gradually. A single unanswered message does not mean rejection, and an awkward first interaction does not mean failure. The effort must be sustained over time, with the understanding that rebuilding trust and comfort takes persistence. Beyond courage and effort, reconnection requires personal transformation. If someone has been isolated for a long time, they may have developed habits or mindsets that make social interaction difficult. They may have become overly self-sufficient, withdrawn, or pessimistic about relationships. To truly reconnect, one must be willing to grow, adapt, and improve. This might involve working on communication skills, developing emotional intelligence, or learning how to be a better listener. It may also mean addressing deeper issues such as social anxiety, trust issues, or past emotional wounds that have contributed to disconnection. Personal transformation is not just about fixing weaknesses. It is also about becoming the kind of person who attracts and sustains meaningful relationships. Friendships and connections thrive on mutual value. People gravitate toward those who bring positivity, reliability, and a sense of presence into their lives. Someone who only reaches out when they are lonely, without offering anything in return, may struggle to maintain relationships. True reconnection comes from being engaged, supportive, and present in others' lives. This requires a shift in mindset from seeking connection purely for personal relief to actively contributing to others' well-being. Part of this transformation also involves forgiveness and letting go of the past. If disconnection has been caused by conflict, misunderstandings, or personal mistakes, holding on to resentment or guilt will only create further barriers. Reconnecting often requires the ability to acknowledge past wounds, take responsibility if needed, and move forward without being weighed down by old pain. It may not always be possible to restore every lost relationship, but healing within oneself allows for new and better connections to form. Ultimately, reconnection is not just about reaching out to others. It is about becoming whole again. It is a process of stepping out of isolation, embracing vulnerability, and transforming oneself into someone who is open to love, friendship, and community. It is about breaking free from self-imposed limitations, facing discomfort with courage, and making the necessary effort to bridge the gap between oneself and others. The journey of reconnection is challenging. It is also deeply rewarding. It leads not only to stronger relationships, but to a renewed sense of self. By choosing to reconnect, a person affirms their own worth, proves to themselves that change is possible, and experiences the richness of human connection once more. It is never too late to reach out. It is never too late to rebuild. Reconnection is always within reach for those who are willing to embrace the courage, effort, and transformation required to make it happen.